Good evening and welcome to E-Bible Fellowship's Bible study in the book of Genesis. Tonight is study number 27 of Genesis chapter 19. And again, we're continuing to read from verse 17. And it came to pass, when they had brought them forth abroad, that he said, Escape for thy life, look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain. Escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. And Lot said unto them, Oh, not so, my lord. Behold now, thy servant hath found grace in thy sight, and thou hast magnified thy mercy, which thou hast showed unto me, in saving my life. And I cannot escape to the mountain, lest some evil take me, and I die. Behold now, this city is near to flee unto, and it is a little one. Oh, let me escape thither. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live. And he said unto me, See, I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow this city, for the which thou hast spoken. Haste thee, escape thither, for I cannot do anything till thou be come thither. Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. The sun was risen upon the earth, when Lot entered into Zoar. Then Jehovah rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from Jehovah out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. I'll stop reading there. Now, in our last study, we were wondering about some things, why it was that God commanded Lot to escape to the mountain, and Lot said that he could not escape to the mountain lest some evil take him and he die. And then he said, he pointed out to God, there's this other city, it's near, it's a little one. Can I not escape to that city? God accepted Lot's proposal or Lot's really intercession. You know, one thing's for sure. If Lot had gone straight to the mountain as he was directed to go, escape for thy life, escape to the mountain lest thou be consumed, Lot would have lived, and those with him, his wife and his daughters, would have lived. That probably his wife would have looked back from that direction also, but anyway, Lot would have survived. He would have lived. But in protesting to God, to these two men who were a form of God, and saying, Not so, as it said in verse 18, Lot said unto them, Oh, not so, my lord, not so, I cannot escape to the mountain. And then by introducing an alternative plan, let me instead go to this little city Zoar that's nearer. What happened as a result? We know that God destroyed the cities of the plain. 4 cities. Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboam. 4 cities, but there were 5 cities. And I think I mentioned it earlier, but let's go back and look at Genesis chapter 14. In Genesis 14, we read of a battle, and it says in verse 1, And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel king of Shinar, Arioch king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer king of Elam, and Tidal king of nations, that these made war with Bera king of Sodom, and with Bersha king of Gomorrah, Shidnab king of Admah, and Shemeber king of Zeboam, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. All these were joined together in the Vale of Siddim. The word vale is valley, which is the Salt Sea. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. 5 kings of 5 cities, they were all together. They were allies. They were unified against these other kings, and also Chedorlaomer, who they served for that period of time. And I'm just going there to point out how Zoar was a city of the plain, like the other 4. Zoar was marked for destruction, like the other 4. As a matter of fact, you could not see any difference between Zoar and the other cities, except it happened to be a little one. It was the littlest city, and apparently the closest city to Sodom. But it was a little city. It was a very little city. Is it not a little one? Was Lot's emphasis. That is, perhaps Lot is saying to the Lord, I understand you're very angry with Sodom, Gomorrah, the cities of the plain. I understand they have offended you. They've certainly done wickedly. They've committed terrible sin, and yet I'm asking you to pardon. I'm asking you not to destroy the littlest one, just a little one out of all the cities of the plain. Could it be that you will not destroy this little one, that I might flee there and live? And God says, I have accepted thee, in verse 21. Concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow this city for the which thou hast spoken. Now, remember back in chapter 18, Abraham made intercession for the righteous souls in Sodom. We went through that countdown. If there are 50 righteous, will you destroy the city? No, I will not destroy it for 50, 40, 30. And it counted all the way down. See, Abraham was interceding for the righteous ones in Sodom because he knew that Lot was there. But Abraham made no intercessory prayer for Gomorrah or Admah or Zeboam or even Zoar. He made no intercessory prayer for those cities. He was concentrating on the city where he knew his nephew Lot lived, and he knew Lot was a righteous man. But Lot, in not immediately fleeing to the mountain, is looking at a portion of that which is under the wrath of God. All the cities of the plain were under the wrath of God. All were marked for destruction. All would certainly be destroyed. But Lot began to get the idea, well, can I not flee to this one little city that's nearby? And again, we discussed in our last study, historically, that was probably all that was in his mind. It had to do with not wanting to travel a distance to be caught maybe on the highway, en route to the mountain, while fire and brimstone is falling from heaven. You have no protection, nowhere to hide. And so that's why he thought evil would overtake him and he would die if he attempted to go to the mountain. But the city Zoar was closer. Let that be a place of refuge. Let that be a shelter. Let that be a safe city in which you will not destroy it. And I think we can see the implications, the spiritual implications, because when we just transfer the whole idea of the 5 cities of the plain as a picture of the whole world, what do we find? Well, in the world, God had a church that Sodom would mostly represent in this case. God had his people within the church. But also out there in the world, as all are under the wrath of God, were God's elect people that the Bible speaks of as a remnant out of the whole. Or what's a remnant? It's a little portion out of the sum total. You have 7 billion people at the time when God brought judgment on the world in populating the earth, and out of that the Bible spoke of the Lord saving a great multitude, which perhaps numbered 150 million, 160 million. We don't know exactly. But that number was very small in comparison to 6 billion, several hundred million that were not to be saved, that were under the wrath of God and marked for destruction. And so the picture is that Zoar is delivered along with Lot. Now Lot, in making intercession for this little city, is really standing in the place of Abraham from the previous chapter. As Abraham made intercession for the righteous, now Lot is interceding for the little city, Zoar. And therefore, he becomes a type of Christ and also a picture of God's people who have the same desire as Christ, because that is the one he instills in us, a desire that the elect become saved, that the elect people of God become saved. And you can see, really spiritually, it then becomes an unselfish act. Well, the command was flee to the mountain personally, Lot, and escape to the mountain, and you'll live. And then Lot is thinking not only of himself spiritually, again, Lot representing the elect, but not so, Lord, not so. There's a world out there. There's a world in which you said there's a great multitude, and so there needs to be deliverance for them as well. There has to be salvation for at least a little portion of the whole of mankind, for a little city, just a little one, oh God. And this is what God grants, and this is why God does not reject Lot's idea like he did reject Peter, as we saw in Acts chapter 10, when God made a major change in doctrine, and God determined to include the Gentiles as well as the Jews, and he illustrated this by having a vision appear to Peter of unclean animals, and then commanding Peter to rise and kill and eat. And Peter said, "Not so, Lord. I've never eaten anything common or unclean." And God rebukes him. "What I have cleansed, call not thou common." Or what the Lord has cleansed. And it was done thrice in order to indicate this is the purpose of God. So God has no problem rebuking someone who's even saved and someone he has given a new heart and a new spirit to. He has no difficulty in doing that. It's not that Lot stood in some special situation to God and because he was elect and therefore whatever Lot desired had to be done. No. But here, when Lot says, "Oh, not so, my Lord, not so, my Lord," and then begins to focus attention on this little city. I cannot escape to the mountain, lest some evil take me and I die. Behold, now this city is near to flee unto, and it is a little one. Oh, let me escape thither. Is it not a little one, and my soul shall live? And he said unto him, See, I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow this city, for the which thou hast spoken. Haste thee, escape thither. For I cannot do anything till thou be come thither. Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. Now again, in the last study, I brought up how some people try to make Zoar a picture of fellowships, and they try to insinuate that Lot is rebellious against God. God commands him to go to the mountain, but in his rebellion, he instead wants to go to Zoar, or a fellowship. In other words, they're saying God has ended the church age, come out of the church, go to God himself, the Word of God, the Bible. But when people attend fellowships, they're in rebellion against God. Well, of course, that doesn't fit at all. And you'll never hear them trying to explain this in particular detail, because they can't. How could it be that God accepted Lot in this thing? How could it be that when people came out of churches that God accepts that they've made substitution of fellowships in place of churches, that some kind of sinful substitution? Well, of course not. Of course not. God would in no way do that. And how can it be that God is actually says he will not overthrow this city? That is, he'll not overthrow fellowships according to their line of thinking, for the which thou hast spoken. And then God is waiting to bring the destruction. And again, this destruction upon Sodom is spiritually pointing to May 21, 2011. That's when the corporate church was destroyed. Up until then, the command to come out of the church was in effect. But once May 21, 2011 came, then the command of God to flee out of the midst of the church, depart out, it was deactivated because, well, now the spiritual destruction has come. And so they're saying, not me, and this is certainly not what the Bible's teaching, they're saying God waited for Lot and his family to come out of the church, and God waited until he steps foot into a fellowship, Zoar, before raining down fire and brimstone from heaven. You see how ridiculous it is, how foolish it is. It's obviously wrong, and yet, unfortunately, some people are so blinded by their desire to have doctrine their way. They're so intent on having a gospel that they accept and approve of, rather than simply what God has done in these end of days and in this end time judgment period. This is all according to the judgment plan of God, that he ends the church age, that he commands his people to come out, and then at the end of the Great Tribulation, he shuts the door of heaven and ends his salvation program. Who would have thought of these things? Certainly not me or Mr. Camping or any of God's people. These are not things we think of. They're if you think about it, who would develop another kind of a gospel, as so many say this is, in which there's no more salvation, and then years go by in which you're telling people you cannot be saved, and we have to sadly tell people as they bring up children and babies that are born, who would develop that kind of a gospel program in order to attract people or draw people or get them to come to their fellowship, it would be absolutely ridiculous. No, this is not our gospel program. It's God's end time program for Judgment Day, which began at the house of God, is now continued on the world. And we are not to make ourselves holier than God. And just because we don't like the idea of 5 people or 100 people gathering together for a fellowship, we're not to search the Bible and try to find something to disprove fellowships because I don't like it. Well, you may not like it, and we're certainly not trying to get people to go to fellowships. Many, the vast majority of God's elect, of the great multitude out there, have no fellowship except with God and the Bible. But if God has not said anything against it, if He permits it, then so be it. So be it. And that is, He allows it. And so He does. And so the whole idea won't stand up to the light of the Bible when you work through it. It's foolish. It's a foolish idea that it has nothing to do with Zohar. Fellowships have nothing to do with Zohar. Well, what does have to do with Zohar? Well, this is not the same word for little one, but this is exactly what Zohar is picturing in Ecclesiastes chapter 9. In Ecclesiastes 9, it says in verse 13, "This wisdom have I seen also under the sun, and it seemed great unto me. There was a little city, and few men within it. And there came a great king against it, and besieged it, and built great bulwarks against it. Now there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no man remembered that same poor man. Then said I, Wisdom is better than strength. Nevertheless the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard." See, the little city in which few men within it points to God's elect, and the city which is delivered by a poor wise man. The poor wise man is a type and figure of the Lord Jesus Christ, who delivers the city. That's why Lot is standing as a picture of Christ, because through his intercession, Zoar is delivered. A little city, which would have meant few inhabitants, and they are spared the wrath of God. They're delivered from the wrath of God. They are not destroyed like the inhabitants of the other 4 cities of the plain. And that's what Zohar is picturing. It's picturing the eternal city, the heavenly city of the kingdom of God, made up of a remnant out of the whole of mankind. And that's why God had to wait. He had to wait for Lot to reach the city, to enter into the city. You know, the way this reads, the moment Lot's feet crossed the boundary, the city limit, then God rained down fire and brimstone upon Sodom and Gomorrah and destroyed them. In other words, the moment God saved the last one of His elect, delivered the last of the righteous, then God brought the judgment upon the world.